He convinced himself the apology had tied everything off. Adrian Hale believed the outrage had burned itself out. Colin Mercer assumed the backlash was over. But when two men who never really let go of a grudge sit under the same studio lamps, even a friendly greeting can sound like provocation. And sometimes it's the quietest exchange that shuts a show down. The Jordan Ross show had weathered uncomfortable interviews before, but that night carried a different current. Subtle, contained, almost courteous on the surface. The kind of tension that doesn't erupt but hangs in the air like an unfinished sentence. Adrian arrived first, dark, tailored suit, open-neck shirt, no tie. He strode onto the stage with a controlled expression, lifted a hand in a brief wave, and gave the audience a careful smile. Polished, restrained, practiced. The applause was warm but not wild. He nodded, eased into the chair opposite Jordan, and crossed one leg over the other with deliberate composure. Jordan leaned in slightly, relaxed as ever. "Adrian, welcome. Good to see you." "Thanks, Jordan," Adrian answered, voice steady as his eyes swept the room. He looked composed, almost unnervingly so. The opening minutes flowed easily enough. Jordan asked about Adrian's current projects, his move abroad, his work in mental health advocacy and charity. Adrian responded smoothly, confident and articulate, slipping into the familiar cadence of someone used to steering his own narrative. Then Jordan's smile shifted. "And joining us now," he said, glancing down the stage, "a man who never seems short of an opinion, broadcaster and columnist Colin Mercer." The crowd reacted instantly, cheers, laughs, and something a bit sharper threaded through it. Colin strolled out, hands loosely clasped, wearing a dark brown blazer and that half-smile he was known for, part charm, part dare. He gave a lazy wave to the audience, then turned toward Adrian. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Colin broke the pause. "Evening." Adrian dipped his head once. "Colin." Jordan felt it immediately, the way the air tightened, how the space between those two chairs suddenly seemed much smaller. "So," Jordan said lightly, trying to hold the mood up, "I think everyone watching is aware there's a bit of history here. Colin, you and Adrian have crossed paths in print." A ripple of nervous laughter rolled through the audience. Adrian didn't smile. Colin exhaled through his nose, a sound almost but not quite a laugh. "That's one description, yes." "You did issue a public apology," Jordan added. "That's important to mention." Colin nodded. "I did, and I meant it." Adrian tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving Colin. "Did you?" The question wasn't loud, but it landed with weight. Colin turned to him, apparently unfazed. "Yes, an apology doesn't rewrite events, Adrian. It acknowledges that certain lines shouldn't have been crossed." Adrian's jaw flexed, barely visible. "Interesting," he said calmly, "because a lot of what you said didn't feel like an accidental misstep. It felt like contempt." Jordan lifted a hand gently. "Let's try to keep this on the level, yeah?" Colin shrugged. "I've never had a personal dislike for Adrian, never have. I criticize public behavior. That's my job." Adrian gave a short, dry breath that might have been a laugh. "Right, the job of deciding who's worthy of empathy and who isn't." The audience shifted. Someone coughed. Jordan's eyes flicked between them. Colin eased back in his chair. "You chose a public life," he said. "You chose to tell your story repeatedly. People are allowed to respond at some point." Adrian leaned in just a little. Responding is one thing, ridicule is something else. Colin held his gaze. "And we could say the same about oversensitivity. There's a limit." There it was, the first open crack. Jordan tried to steer away. "Adrian, do you feel commentators like Colin fundamentally misinterpret you?" "I think some commentators build careers on doing exactly that. Misinterpretation is profitable." Colin's mouth tugged in a faint smile. "Or maybe clarity is." Adrian's smile vanished altogether. "You see," he said, voice still level but cooling, "that's part of the problem. You rebrand cruelty as straight talking." "And you," Colin replied, still casual, "rebrand resentment as principle." The audience gasped softly. Jordan leaned forward. "Okay, let's ease off the throttle a bit." But Adrian wasn't done. "You apologized," he said, eyes fixed on Colin, "and yet here you are still positioning yourself as referee of what's acceptable, still talking about my family like we're content." Colin's expression barely shifted. "Your family stepped into the spotlight," he said. "They didn't stay in the wings." The room froze. For the first time, Adrian's composure slipped visibly. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, then straightened. "This," he said quietly, "is exactly why apologies feel empty when the thinking behind them doesn't move an inch." Jordan felt the balance sliding away. He glanced toward the control room, then back to his guests. "All right, gentlemen," he said with a forced smile. "We have a whole show ahead of us." Colin laced his fingers together. "So do I," he said. Adrian leaned back, arms folding across his chest now, body closing off. The smiles were gone. The polite veneer had thinned to almost nothing. And whatever this was turning into, it wasn't a standard chat show segment anymore. It was a reckoning, and everyone in the building could feel it. The easy rhythm that usually followed Jordan's transitions never returned. Instead, a careful, brittle hush settled over the studio, polite but tense, as if the audience had collectively sat up a little straighter. The air felt charged, but not in a fun way. This wasn't entertainment now. It was unfinished business. Jordan cleared his throat, forcing levity into his voice. "Well, if we're going to skirt around the elephant in the room," he said, "we might as well invite it all the way onto the sofa." A few uncertain laughs fluttered through the crowd. "Colin," Jordan continued, glancing down the stage, "a man who never seems short of an opinion, broadcaster and columnist, Colin Mercer." A moment of uneasy silence followed before the audience responded. "At least he's honest," someone shouted from the back. "Colin always tells it like it is." A sharp laugh came from another part of the audience. Like it is, according to whom? Didn't he? Jordan's smile faltered. He'd counted on a light-hearted response to the elephant in the room line, but instead it seemed to open floodgates of unspoken tension. The audience's focus shifted back to Adrian, who hadn't responded. His expression remained measured, but it wasn't calm. It was the calm of a shell crater before the dust has settled. The reason Jordan had invited them together was something he generally tried to avoid: confrontation and a certain kind of dangerous unpredictability. "That brevet has spent far too much time classifying people like me in categories of unworthy victims," Adrian had said in his recent interview. Even when he apologized, it wasn't because he saw my family as individuals. It was because he crossed an invisible line in the game we were being forced to play. Colin had responded in his column only days earlier, not directly to Adrian, but to the general notion of so-called informed commentary. "It's our job," he'd written, "to balance someone's subjective experience with the objective reality of their choices and disconcerting implications they hold." Each man believed himself right. Each thought the other owed him an apology, not just for past sins, but for a current failure to understand. Jordan seemed to realize just how precarious this segment had become. The real reason he'd brought them together was not just to mend fences, but to create an explosive moment. The game was rigged, and he had helped set it up.
He'd fed them each other's clips, baited the comment sections, and ensured both men arrived with reasons to be guarded, Ursling in the studio lamps. Adrian looked at Jordan for the first time since he'd walked on stage. "This isn't a standard chat show segment, is it?" he said, quietly, but cutting through the tense air. Jordan managed a small, defensive laugh. "No, of course it isn't. It's a chance for a real dialogue, not just scripted answers." Adrian's lips curled slightly at a distance. A real dialogue, or a chance to see who walks away first? Jordan felt the chill. "Adrian, do you feel the public at large doesn't get you?" "I feel," Adrian replied immediately, "that some people work very hard to keep misunderstanding me, especially those who apologize on camera while still enjoying the spotlight they get for provoking us." Colin's smile flickered. "And that
was leaning forward, anchored, braced. Colin took a measured sip of water, unhurried, as if the passage of time worked in his favor. Jordan looked from one man to the other, every instinct telling him the next few minutes would define the episode. When the cameras went live again, the red tally light glowed like a warning. "We're back," Jordan said, his voice noticeably controlled. "Clearly, this is a charged topic, and I want us to keep it as constructive as possible." Adrian exhaled, a tight breath through his nose. "Constructive conversations only work when honesty runs both ways." Colin nodded. "On that, we agree." Jordan latched on to that sliver. "Adrian, let me put this to you plainly," he said. "Do you think commentators like Colin should stop discussing you and your family altogether?" Adrian looked at him, but the answer was aimed straight at Colin. "No," he said, "I think people like Colin need to stop pretending their words float free of impact." Colin tilted his head. "So we're responsible for your feelings now?" "You're responsible," Adrian snapped, "for the reactions you deliberately provoke." Colin's tone cooled further. "You keep framing this as harm," he said. "You never allow for the idea that not everyone who disagrees with you is abusive." "When that disagreement always punches down," Adrian replied, jaw tight, "yes, it is." The audience stirred. "Colin," asked Jordan, "do you think you crossed that line in the past?" "Yes," Colin said, without delay, "which is why I apologized." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Then why cling so tightly to the mindset that created those words?" Colin answered more slowly now. "Because saying sorry for how I expressed something doesn't require me to abandon how I see the world." It hit like a controlled explosion. Adrian leaned back, shaking his head slightly. "That's exactly it," he said. "You want forgiveness without real self-examination." Colin gave a quiet scoff. "And you want self-examination without anyone pushing back." Jordan cut in, trying to redirect. "Adrian, some people say you've become more reactive to criticism since stepping away from your former life. How would you answer that?" Adrian gave a short, bitter laugh. "Of course they say that." Colin's eyebrow rose. "Well?" Adrian turned to him. "I'd say I finally stopped absorbing abuse in silence." "Or," Colin countered, "you stopped tolerating any real challenge." "You reduce everything to wordplay," Adrian said, leaning in again, "because it protects your comfort. And you inflate every disagreement into a moral crisis," Colin shot back, "because it keeps you at the center of the drama." The audience reacted audibly this time, a mix of gasps and stunned quiet. Jordan's fingers tightened around his cue cards. "Colin—" "No," Adrian cut in, pushing halfway up from his chair before pausing. He remained there, hovering. "Say what you actually think." Colin met his gaze. "Fine," he said. "I think you've mixed up being open about your pain with being beyond question." Adrian's face flushed. "And I think you've mixed up arrogance with bravery."
A beat, then another. Adrian, Jordan tried again, do you ever worry that this kind of confrontation only feeds the cycle you say you want to break? Adrian's voice was controlled, but a tremor ran underneath. The cycle continues whether I speak or not. The only difference is that now I refuse to quietly play the part everyone found convenient. No one wanted you quiet, Colin replied. We wanted you honest without turning every appearance into a theatrical indictment. You don't get to define my honesty, Adrian snapped. And you don't get to declare yourself off limits, Colin answered, his eyes hardening for the first time. The whole studio seemed to hold its breath. Jordan rose slightly, palms open. Please, this is getting personal. It was never anything but personal, Adrian shot back. You crafted an entire on-air identity around stirring people up, and when it finally catches up with you, you retreat into slogans about free speech. And you, Colin replied, built a public identity around resentment and named it healing. The reaction from the audience was immediate and loud. Okay, Jordan said, his voice cracking almost imperceptibly. I'm stepping in now. Adrian laughed again, louder this time, but void of amusement. Of course you are. Colin looked at Jordan. Let him talk, he said. Adrian's eyes burned. You don't want that. Colin shrugged. I'm not scared of it. Adrian stood up fully now, no longer anchored to the chair. Do you think this is a game? He asked. For you, it's content. For me, it's my actual life. Colin didn't raise his tone, which somehow made it worse, and for everyone watching, it's the same story on repeat. Adrian's fists clenched, because people like you won't let it evolve. Or, Colin replied softly, because you won't stop retelling it. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Jordan glanced toward the wings, panic edging into his eyes. Producers gestured wildly, one making a slicing motion across their throat. Adrian caught it. He straightened, breathing hard. You know something, he said, slowly. This is exactly why I shouldn't have agreed to this. Colin didn't smile. On that, we finally agree. Jordan moved quickly now. Adrian, please, let's not let it end like this. Adrian turned to the audience, then back to Colin one last time. You wanted honesty, he said. Here it is. You don't challenge power. You capitalize on other people's hurt. Colin rose as well, meeting his eyes. And you don't challenge narratives. You swap every story out for your own. The room erupted, not in applause, but in raw sound. Gasps, scattered shouts, a stunned buzz. Adrian stood there, chest heaving. He hadn't walked yet, but everyone watching knew he was on the edge. Whatever happened next wouldn't be smoothed over or neatly redirected. It would be final. The show had passed a point it couldn't return from. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a standoff. Two men under unblinking lights, neither willing to step back, both aware the next line might decide the end. Jordan now stood fully between them, visibly shaken. Not theatrical, not performative, just a man who knew the reins had slipped. Adrian, please, he said softly, almost pleading. Sit down. We can start fresh. Adrian stayed where he was. His gaze stayed locked on Colin, but something in his posture had changed. This wasn't about a joke, an article, or a headline anymore. It was about self-respect. You know what's interesting? Adrian said, voice low but perfectly clear. You complain about people being tired of my story, yet you've spent years repeating the same provocation until people mistake it for truth. Colin let out a slow breath. And you've spent years insisting that your pain is intouchable. Colin, no, Jordan started. He asked for honesty, Colin said calmly. Honesty from you? Adrian gave a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Yes, Colin nodded once. The audience rustled. A few people shifted in their seats, uneasy, but no one looked away. You want the press held to account. You want commentators, readers, everyone to examine themselves. But you never really accept that living publicly means people will question you. Not attack you, question you. I didn't choose the spotlight, Adrian replied. I was born into it. And yet, Colin said, you've turned it into a very successful enterprise. That was the moment the air changed. Adrian's face didn't redden or contort. It simply hardened, like a door closing. Jordan saw it immediately. He'd witnessed anger before. This was something else, a decision. Say that again, Adrian said quietly. Colin didn't pause. You condemn the machine, yet profit from the attention it's always given you. All right, that's enough, Jordan stepped in sharply. No, it isn't. He turned back to Colin. You think leaving that world was easy, he demanded? You think walking away from my role, my home, my identity was some kind of marketing move? Colin didn't raise his voice. I think you left a life you no longer wanted and expected applause for doing it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh no." Adrian's breathing quickened. You don't know anything about what that cost, he said. You sit behind irony, mocking choices you'll never have to face. Colin stepped closer too, narrowing the gap. And you, Colin answered, pull out your trauma like a shield every time someone pushes back. Gentlemen, enough, Jordan said, both hands up now. This is why trying to talk like this is pointless, Adrian said bitterly. You're not here for conversation, you're here to win. And you're not here to examine yourself, you're here to be immune. The audience went utterly still. Adrian looked around the studio, at the cameras, the faces, Jordan frozen beside them. Then he laughed once, a quiet,